So, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you, first of all, Dominic, for your time, your disposal, and also the preparation time. This is a series that we are running post-COVID with CEOs with leading role in Switzerland in different industries. Of course, one of my preferred industries is actually food and food tech, clearly. By the way, I had some issues during COVID about food and growing personally also as well. But I guess this is pretty much what is happening with a lot of people, changing their habits, changing their the way they consume, the way they get things at home. And also I get is going to be a very, very interesting year now on everything is about food, grocery, delivery for the future. So thank you very much, Dominic, for joining us today. And I would really like to ask you if you can introduce yourself with your story and your personal history.
Absolutely, I can. Thank you very much for having me. So the name is Dominic Millioud. I'm with Eat.ch since 9 years now. I'm acting as a managing director since 5 years in the company, and I made the full story from the very beginning. We've been two at one table thinking about, so the idea was there, the platform was there already, but then there was really the time to start scaling the business, and that's what we've done. So I built up the sales organization, and then after the founders team left, I could take over as a managing director and do this since a couple of years now. And the overall journey was really, really interesting and really fun. And obviously COVID has accelerated the whole business again more. But winding back a little bit longer, I was born and raised in Switzerland and Germany. I spent most of my young years in Germany. I lived there in multiple cities and then came back to Switzerland. Started also my career in Germany, basically. And when I came to Switzerland, I stumbled over Eat.ch at the time because they announced an investment or the joint venture with Just Eat at the time. And I called them up and asked if they were looking for somebody, if I could help out with something. And this is how it happens. And then the rest is really history.
So this is your very first and long job career, or you did something before in tech or in other industries?
I did something else in other industries. I got self-employed when I was 19. I was more in the music industry, more of a service thing in the music industry, lots of touring at the time, etc. It was really fun. And then after university, I went to LVMH, Louis Vuitton at Hennessy, in the sales department, and I was working on as a sales rep with key accounts and so forth. And the next step after that was the Mars, so the American sweet bar industry company Mars. I worked there for the pet food section, and I was a key account manager there. And it was just a whole different world. Lots of sale techniques were the same, so I could learn a lot at LVMH. I could learn a lot in Mars. But then after that, I decided after a total of 6 or 7 years, I said, no, that's the corporate big world is not really what I wanted to do. So I stepped out and was looking for something else. And luckily, I found Eat.ch.
So very interesting. You mentioned luxury and fashion. You mentioned pet food, and you mentioned, of course, food. That's clear. Which, in my opinion, right now are three of the most dramatically affected industries in this e-commerce and post-COVID situation. I was reading some data of GfK that the pet food is also growing incredibly on e-commerce. Vice versa, the luxury industry is actually, unfortunately, deeply negatively affected by what is going on today. But now we are here to talk about the food sector. So can you explain a little bit what Eat.ch is in sense of the business model of the company, and also, of course, some first reflection of what's going on in Switzerland?
Okay, so Eat.ch is an aggregator for online food delivery, if you like. So we operate as a platform. We onboard restaurants on the one hand side, and on the other hand side, we onboard customers who then order on our platform, and these orders we will transfer to the restaurants. In general, there's two big sections of the business. One we call marketplace, and this is where the big differentiator is that the restaurant delivers by himself. So he has own drivers and brings out the food. That will be the classic pizza delivery, the classic Asian delivery that you know, and that is around since many, many years in Switzerland. So that's called marketplace. And then the newer part of the business we call delivery. And this is where we employ drivers. So basically, we go then to traditional gastronomy, and we offer there a full package of the online ordering tool that we have already, but also the logistical part. So they don't even need to expand to logistics because we do it for them. And that has been the part that has growing very rapidly and very dynamically over the last couple of years. And that is true up until now. And as you see on a global landscape, these are also the companies that scale pretty fast. We are lucky enough to have it integrated. So we're a hybrid model, if you like. We have the marketplace, restaurants delivering themselves, and then add additional restaurants that don't deliver themselves at this very moment. And the real purpose of it is that for the self-delivery, so the marketplace restaurants, a lot of it is pizza and kebab and some Chinese restaurants. But then all the fancy newer stuff, the food bowls, the salad bars, the new burger places, these don't deliver that by themselves. So these were more newer concepts, but delivery hasn't been on their roadmap for themselves, but they use the service, an external service, in that case ours, where we then could start delivering. And that's great for them, but it's also great for our customers, because with that additional service, we added a lot of new restaurants, a lot of new cuisines that you couldn't have before. So there's lots of Chinese, Mexican, Filipino, Korean food, etc., that we could now add to the platform. Obviously, for the customer, it's just more choice and more fun, and therefore he will also then order more frequently. And that is basically the best sign for a healthy customer base, that if every single customer starts using the service more and more.
And I see you really live in a kind of network business model where you need to have customer on one side and let's say provider or partner on the other side. Who is your customer? Like, who do you consider to be your customer?
The customer, to differentiate between the consumer and the restaurant partner, or you mean within the consumers?
In your mindset, when you wake up and you need to deliver, who is your customer? Is the final customer, or are the restaurant?
That's a great question, and it changed over time. I would say that the answer would change over time. If you ask me today, I would say the consumer, so the consumer at home. Back in the day when we started the platform, or scaling the platform, or it was more about scaling, it was really about the offer that you had. So if you didn't have a relevant amount of restaurant in a certain region, customers would come and would bounce because they only find 2 restaurants, and they say, that's not what I expected. So at the very beginning, the most important one was to have offers. And now if we think about adding new restaurants or adding some technology features, for example, so if you have that discussion, then it's always around the customer. So it really is a customer-centric organization right now. But again, our restaurant partners are very close, as important, because without the restaurant partners, we don't have any existence. So they are the best partners for us. Hopefully we are a great partner for them. But then in the end, it's the consumer at home who takes the decision what he wants to eat, how he wants to use the service, and what kind of services he actually wants to see. Is it breakfast? Is it lunch? Is it the coffee that I can order? Or is it mainly dinner during the week, at the weekends, etc.? So it's really then down to him.
Understand. Thank you very much. And what is the revenue stream like? Do you have a setup cost for the restaurants to join the platform, or it's a transactional fee? Like, what is the scheme, if may ask?
Yeah, it's a mix. So the biggest part of our revenue comes out of the revenue share model. So basically a commission that we charge to the restaurant. If we transfer an order, that's basically revenue that comes through our stream. We did the acquisition part on the consumer side. So they used our service, and then we transfer the order. And on that revenue, we take a commission. And that's the biggest part. If you want to join Eat.ch, at the beginning, there's a setup fee. And we also give you a device for your restaurant where the orders are being printed, where you can manage the orders and everything that you need, including statistics, etc. And that we will also provide for you. So it's a mix of both.
And the hardware device, I was not aware of that, is a substitute of the cachet, or is on top of that?
It's on top of that. Basically, it's purely a device that just processes our orders, that prints them out, and whether then you integrate it as a restaurant with your cashier system, but the majority of the restaurants have a separate cashier system, and then they just retype the orders, or they do in a bookkeeping sense on a daily or weekly or monthly level, where they then integrate it into their bookkeeping.
Understand. And talking about some numbers, just maybe, I don't know if everybody is aware about the dimension of your company, if you may say, how many clients, how many restaurants, like, can you give us some indicators of the dimension of your business?
Yeah, so at this very moment, we're very close to 3,000 restaurant partners that we have online. And in terms of orders, we are very selective in how to communicate those kind of numbers, also because we're a global acting company, so we're part of the Just Eat PLC, now the Just Eat Takeaway company. And we announced in January that we had more than 500,000 orders in January. But since then, we had a quite substantial growth up until today. But this is kind of the dimensions that we operate in.
Yeah, super. Just for everybody, I forgot to mention at the beginning, I apologize for that. We start with a round of questions, which I personally made to you, Dominic, and then we will pick up from the audience. We are starting receiving some questions already, but keep it there. We will get back. Thank you, everybody from the audience, for already being so much interactive. So perfect. I understand, and I guess everybody has understood a bit the business model where you are, and also, I mean, the numbers, which, I mean, as you said, I guess, and assume is a significant numbers also in terms of turnover. So congratulations, by the way, for what you have achieved in the growth, which was not at all necessarily going to be like this. So it's always a mix, I guess, between the leadership capacity of the management and the trends of the market. And I have to say also, with what you just mentioned, the acquisition, it looks like you definitely work in the right direction. On the other side, of course, we are in the middle of a revolution. I mean, everybody here has been touched by the COVID situation. I'm personally in an office of 1,000 square meters just by myself at my personal concept of smart working, but I've been locked at home for 2 months now. How that has boosted or changed or affected you and the restaurants?
Yeah, so for us as Eat.ch and for our team, obviously it was a huge change. So it was one of those moments where everyone got overwhelmed, and then we started understanding the size of the problem and the size of the impact that it has during end of February, beginning of March. And luckily, we were one of the companies that was able to start home working very early. So since we don't have machines that we need to operate in the offices, obviously we're an online company, we're a service company. So then we started very quickly to let people work from home, just for security reasons, to keep everyone safe in the end. And then it's worked out pretty well. Obviously, we had our challenges, you know, from a technology point of view, from a customer care point of view. So if something goes wrong with an order, or there's a question, then customer can call us, and it's the customer care center that we do out of Switzerland. And obviously doing this from home is a lot more complicated than having a call center where you have multiple people doing that. So this is definitely some of the challenges. And then during the crisis, our restaurants partner at one moment had to close down their sit-in capabilities. That obviously was a huge hit for them. Luckily, the take-out and the delivery part could continue to exist. So we needed to make some adaptations there too. We introduced something called a contact-free delivery. So you as a consumer at home, you could click, check a button and say, I want a contact-free delivery. That meant you as a consumer must pay cash-free on our website. So you needed to use a credit card or any other online payment method. We disenabled cash, something that we've always had. Then you couldn't do so anymore. And the driver then would leave the food in front of your house. He would ring the bell. He would step back 2 meters. So you could open the door and then take the orders, and then we process it like this. So there's just a distance between the driver, first to keep the consumer safe, but also to keep our drivers safe, who then still had a lot of interactions. So this was the big change for them. And then obviously our business started scaling very quickly. So we saw a huge uptick in demand. Huge uptick in new customers, in orders that are being placed. And obviously that helped the restaurant compensate some of their losses, right? So if you lose 100% of your sit-in business, but your delivery and take-out business sees a significant uptick, it depends a little bit on the structure of the restaurant and what kind of restaurant you are, but it helped quite a bit, right? And then obviously we had lots of new restaurant partners joining us. that put us to another challenge of onboarding those restaurants so quickly. It's a lot of manual work involved with the menu typing on our end, etc. So there was some certain delays, but we just saw there were more and more restaurants who stayed open, who offered takeout newly, they haven't done, and then they were onboarding with us, and or they were even then adding the delivery part to their business just to keep afloat and secure some of the revenues. So yeah, it was a pretty instant and a huge impact for that industry.
And what do you expect for the future? Like, what do you expect for the next months? Like, how do you see that the consumption of people, especially related to restaurants, is going to evolve, in your opinion?
It's a lot of crystal ball talking involved here. So the restaurants reopened at the beginning of this week. We haven't seen an impact on our orders at this very moment. If you look at a couple of research that comes out of China or is then also looking at a European perspective, I think, and I tend to agree there, that it is a change in behavior that doesn't go back to pre-COVID at its entirety. Are continuing, I think consumers will continue to use more e-commerce online services for all the things that, like you said, pet food at the beginning, groceries is surely a topic. Our services is surely a topic where this will continue. Some of the other will obviously go back. So if you go luxury brands, for example, that you mentioned at the beginning, you want, those brands for good reasons have a boutique where you can go in and you feel and smell and have a bit more of an experience with a brand like this. For a service, for an online service, or for a good that is pet food, it's not so important. So I think a lot of that online jump that we've seen will maintain there, but obviously people will go back to restaurants at any given time. People will then probably cook a little bit less than they do at this very moment because they were just forced to do so. So I think the trend will continue. I think it was a step change in the development that we've seen in the digitalization in general, and I don't expect it to go back to pre-COVID levels ever.
And you just briefly mentioned, but I remember when we had the presentation together, you talk about something interesting from a trend point of view, which I remember from my past experience in grocery. That was the so-called stomach war. So you can only eat theoretically once for lunch, once for dinner. And of course here, especially during COVID, I saw social media exploding about activities of cooking, and I also saw on e-commerce data how many robot machines have been bought. I mean, I was talking with Whirlpool a while ago. They said that we never saw so many KitchenAid online on top of that, which was not so usual. But what do you see happening from cooking versus home delivery? Like, what's the situation and what's it gonna be?
Look, I think the whole cooking wasn't really a choice that the consumer made because you just had to, because the restaurants were closed, all the out of house, all the takeout industry disappeared. People didn't go to the offices, so the lunch in your cantina didn't exist anymore. So people were forced to feed themselves, obviously, and a lot of them did the cooking, which is great. And that we see an uptick in bread baking machines, which I think was the item with the highest growth. It makes total sense, and it's also great that people reflect more on how they eat and what they eat and start cooking more. And if you look at the sales, how much more vegetables and fruits have been sold, it's also a step change towards healthier nourishing themselves, which is great to see. I think that home cooking part will naturally go down pretty steeply, just because of the reason, if people start going back to the offices, whenever that happens and at what extent that ever happens, they won't spend that much time at home, so they won't do their lunches at home, obviously. And I think a lot of people crave now for a nice dinner somewhere out, and just have that, that luxury time with your friends, with your spouse, with your family, going to a restaurant and enjoy a nice dinner. So I think this one will come back. So the cooking will go back significantly. I think restaurant obviously will pick up again. That will take a little bit of time up until this really goes to the level where it was pre-COVID. That might even take years in my point of view. And I think the home delivery has established, so our industry has established to an alternative, which is I don't have to cook twice a day, 7 days a week, but there's an alternative. Now, if then office lunches come back, and if restaurants open again, obviously that might go down there a little bit too. But for our personal business, I don't see any slowdown anytime soon. So I think it will be more the home cooking that will go back, and then for the sake of more canteen lunches and some restaurant visits.
Yeah. And I was thinking while you were speaking about why people make order online delivery food, and I was more thinking for the first time actually about how much is the role of offices ordering lunch. Is it something in Switzerland big or not? Like how much this thing, like the smart working concept, will affect the lunch ordering, if there's any?
Yeah, there obviously is lunch ordering, but actually what we've seen during the COVID crisis up until now is that lunch orders have some of the area of our business that have grown the most. Because if you work and you're in calls, as most of the people who started working from home all the time, you just want your lunch delivered, because then you don't need to, prepare for 20, 30 minutes and then eat and then wash up and go back to work. But then it's, from a timing perspective, it's better to order something in. It comes, you can directly sit down with your family, you have your lunch, and then you go back to work. So for that reason, this has seen a big spike. Lunch ordering generally in Switzerland is, compared to other countries where we operate, isn't that huge yet. It's growing. It's always been growing over the last couple of years. But there's, with the canteens in Switzerland, so the culture of having good cuisines and canteens is one thing. But then usually also in the surrounding of office buildings, there's always a nice, a quick service restaurant, a nice Chinese, a nice Italian place that you could go and sit down and have a quick lunch for a reasonable price with a lunch menu, something like this. So that actually wasn't really at risk for us. But we've seen the consumer behavior change towards lunch ordering, towards ordering a lot more during the week, at the beginning of the week, the Monday nights, the Tuesday nights, the Friday nights have seen a huge spike. And then traditionally, the strongest day in the week, which was always the Sunday, that has within the week has lost kind of its importance, right? Because then Saturday you maybe were doing some shopping, and then Sunday you really had that one day off where you could spend time with your family and spend your time home. And then I think people were cooking a bit more, because you just have more time on a Sunday. You can celebrate also the cooking at home with your family. And I think it's great. So this is what we've seen in the customer behavior, and it was imminent. It was literally overnight where this shift has happened and has surprised us. So overall, our business was doing really, really well. But then if you looked a little bit deeper, that was some of the interesting findings that we saw.
So we do have still some time to our chat, but I see that there are coming a lot of questions from the audience. So let's start picking up some of them. Okay. And thanks for the engagement. So I would go for the first one which is posed by Claire, and she says, how do you guarantee quality for the end consumer when you are the owner of the marketplace, so non-directly involved in the provision? Thank you.
Quality for the end consumer. So the quality, look, in the end, the restaurant is responsible for the quality of the food. We don't sit in the restaurant and we don't tell the restaurant how to do things. We help them making their business better and efficient and consult a lot in that regard. But in the end, this is the main skill of a restaurant for the quality. So we don't really, we have hardly influence on their quality, to be honest. But then in the end, if you order as a consumer, you always have the opportunity to rate that order, and you can say whether the quality or the delivery delay, etc., you liked it or you didn't like it. So, and then that star rating that you give is part of the That's one of the indicators how restaurants are listed on our website. So if you type in your zip code on our website, or you locate yourself on our website, then we show you the restaurants around you. And the list that we show you, one of the big criteria is those ratings. So if a lot of customers have rated the food well, have rated the delivery delays well, and we've seen in our numbers that a lot of consumers have reordered at a later point at a restaurant, that's the best sign of the quality of that restaurant must be great, right? The overall experience was great. And these are some of the criteria how we list them. And obviously, the better you list it on our website, the more likely is that customer order from your end.
When you say, thank you, Claire. And when we say that you consult a lot restaurants, which are the tips that you can give also now, I guess maybe to someone that is listening us or will listen to us, which are the tips for restaurants in this situation to improve their turnover at the end?
Okay, so I think we need to differentiate there in restaurants who already are engaged with home delivery or takeout, what we call click and collect. So you can order on Eat.ch and say, I'm going to click and collect, I want to pick it up myself. If you're engaged with this one or you're not. So I think if you're already engaged with this one, I think you were some of the lucky ones, because that part of the restaurant revenue has risen steeply, whereas the sit-in business, obviously, as we discussed before, has disappeared. So some sort of a total revenue perspective, you were losing, but you were losing everything. On the other hand, the restaurants who weren't engaged in that part of the business, they were losing everything. So they then needed to quickly adapt, whether to say, I just shut down my restaurant, that's one option, or I start doing some takeout and or delivery for my business. And a lot of them, I hope for a lot of them, this has helped them to keep afloat and have some sort of the share of the revenue that they had before, just to maintain the business, pay the rent, pay their employees, and so forth. But I hope it also proved, and that's the feedback that we've got from those new customers on a restaurant side, that this is just a different pillar in your revenue. This is not taking away your customer that sit in. That's a different experience. That's a different customer expectation and behavior there. So it really is an additional part. And that's what we've always seen. When we onboarded restaurants, there was really incremental revenue on top of what they were already doing. And that's the best case for all parties, for us, for the consumer, for the restaurant, right? So if you can do so and you build up that additional pillar, it will just make you more, how can I say, more protected towards a risk that you have. If you have a construction in front of your restaurant and people don't come anymore, you still have the delivery and so forth. So it just helps you mitigating the risks a little bit better.
And from an acquisition point of view of new customers, because I guess that this is a big topic as well. So when you are into your platform, you are offering a service to the existing customers that you have in the restaurant, a new services enabled by you, or you are providing new typology of customers? Like, well, do you have any data around that?
That is, it is many, because it is incremental revenue. So we proved over and over again that if a restaurant joins us, even if he did delivery himself and he had the classic, the flyers that he was printing, and he had his own website, and he maybe had his own app and was doing his own advertising, still when he joined us, we were able to deliver him customers that he's never had. So, and this is, I think, what is the best proof is just we're 12 years now in Switzerland, and our restaurant estate keeps growing. And there's a lot of restaurant partners acquire restaurants partners, so friends, all of them know each other, and they just say, hey, join Eat.ch because it's a good thing. They wouldn't do so if we were just cannibalizing their existing revenue and replace it with ours and take a commission on top of that. That wouldn't make sense. So from that regard, it works out really well, and I think everyone's happy with it.
And what's I was thinking as a customer, I don't know what's the relation there. So if I live in an area of Zurich, which is, 30 minutes from a takeaway restaurant, does it make sense to order, or I will receive the food cold? Like, what is the general statistic on the distance between the mouth and the oven?
Yeah. Again, I need to differentiate. The restaurants in Marketplace who deliver by themselves, they decide their delivery area. obviously we consult them to keep it as dense as possible, because the further you drive, the food quality starts going down. There's food that travels really well, there's dishes that travel really well, but still at one moment in time they get cold. And there's other dishes that are a bit more sensitive that don't travel so well. So the overall quality doesn't get better, basically. So they decide by themselves, but we ask them to keep it quite dense, just for quality reasons and efficiency reasons in your fleet, because your driver needs to drive around. If he drives, he doesn't earn money. He earns money when he drops the food off. And in general, to give an answer to your questions, we're trying to have the drive time between the restaurant and the consumer somewhere between 10, maximum 15 minutes. That's kind of what has proved to be a good balance between you reach enough customer in that kind of driving area, and on the other hand, the food quality stays fairly safe in that regard. So this is kind of the 10, 15 minutes, kind of the max.
Thank you. So we have a question also from Gloria, and if anybody wants to start making questions, then we're opening the floor. So Gloria, she's asking regarding health, did you see an increase in ordering more healthy options during COVID, or more people prefer comfort food, fast food alternative? There's the ratio between the two. What's the ratio?
Okay. So healthy food, and it's a bit of a question of definition. What we define to be healthy food is, for example, sushi, wraps, salad bars, those bowls that you find now more and more. So rice with some veggies or some protein sources on top. These we consider healthy food. And indeed, that part of the business has grown fairly steep. So it's not that much of the comfort food that you actually would expect in times like these to grow up pretty quickly. But it was really around the healthy and reasonable type of foods that have grown quite a bit. But we need to say, within the 12 years that we operate, number one dish since 12 years is the pizza margherita. And I think it will always stay like that. So by today, it's less than just under half of the orders is pizza or contain a pizza. And then the other half obviously is then the other food. But that share of non-pizza has grown more rapidly since we started doing our own logistic and then adding other types of restaurants to the offer.
I don't know if you have any data that's really, I'm asking, but I don't know if you have any clue about the economics of a restaurant. So the one of your partners, like, is there any specific food that is statistically largely more profitable than others?
Of course, there's huge differences in profitability. Look, everything which is, if you have a pure vegetarian or vegan dish, usually the ingredient cost is lower just because of meat per kilogram is just way more expensive. So this is a big differentiator. And then it also depends on how complicated it is to prepare it, right? Sometimes dishes take a long time to prepare. Others are pretty straightforward. Some you do immediately. You can à la minute, for example. You get an order, you do it right now, you pack it and you deliver. And other ones, you need to pre-prepare them because otherwise it just would take too long and it wouldn't make sense. So I think there's huge differences. And for the restaurant, it's important and interesting to have a nice mix of those, right? To offer those kind of special dishes that not everyone has, that might take a little bit more time and are a bit more complicated to produce, but it distinguishes you from all the other restaurants. But then you also need some dishes, and including drinks, obviously, would then have a better margin. So the overall concept then works out with that you have a nice profit margin and can make a living out of it.
So exactly right now when we needed another question, I was preparing mine, but Sophie helped me out. So, and I was actually going in this direction. Which technology excites you most for potential route in the next 2-3 years to improve your offering? But I would also add in the food tech space. Okay,
there's probably two big areas that I'm really interested to see. Everything is around, number one is around customization. So how can we anticipate your next order better? Because right now, at the beginning, 9 years ago, we had the problem we didn't have enough restaurants. So you came to the website and you saw 3, 5, 7 restaurants in your area that deliver to your house, and that's not great. Right now, in many cities, we have 100, 200 restaurants as an offer. And that obviously is too much. So how can I then start customize it? Obviously, we have all the filters that you can filter by pasta and Thai and Asian cuisine and sushi and so forth. But then still, you might have quite a bit of restaurants. So what we were trying to do and successfully started doing is working with some algorithms where we could see you as a customer, whether you have ordered once, 5 or 7 times with us. We can pretty good anticipate A, when you will order again, and B, what you will order again. So there's a 50% chance, for example, that one customer who ordered now his chicken tikka masala, with 50% chance his next order will be a chicken tikka masala, right? So there already you have a 50% chance. If you come back and I offer you a reorder functionality where I say, hey, with one click, you can reorder your chicken tikka masala, that's great, because in 50% of the chances, I will make your next journey on our product really simple and really easy. And then the other 50%, they are the tricky ones to solve, because then I say, okay, is he then jumping back, he or she, is he jumping back to a different restaurant of the same cuisine type, or is he changing the cuisine type? And then, how is that happening? So that personalization that I can make, they can kind of administer the choice that you have. And I can show you, this is what you ordered last time, you want it again, or I have some recommended offers for you. And this is what we started doing, collating basically your customer behavior with other people's customer behavior and finding similarities. And based on that one, showing you some offers. And that has worked really, really well. But we're at the very beginning, right? And that's the customization bit. Maybe stop here. And the other one is the future of ordering. How are you ordering in general? So we have all that online trend in general. Within the online trend, you see the mobile trend, right? And the next thing is voice ordering. So how can you use your home device, I don't know, Alexa or whatever it might be that you use at home, to order food? Because that becomes even a bigger problem, because you say, I'm hungry and I want to eat. Well, then there's, I don't know how many 100 restaurant types and restaurants itself that can deliver. If you say pizza, there still are 100 pizza restaurants in your area. So how is then Alexa deciding which is the best pizza restaurant for you to recommend, particularly if you're a new customer? Because if the first experience isn't great, we spend a lot of marketing money to onboard you. You ordered once and then you go back. So that's money really bad spent for us. So I think this is then the biggest thing that happens. The customization today and within the next 1-2 years, and then voice, I think that will start a little bit later and start scaling a little bit later, but that's pretty tricky to do. But that's the interesting bit.
As usual, I'm the president of the Swiss E-commerce Association, and now I also have a track record from 2002. And every year there is the new trend, the new technology, the one that is going to disrupt. And we had a couple of years ago, but even now, AI. Then there has been quite a hype for VR and AR. Now nobody talks about it. But you mentioned now voice commerce, and I've been to the CES in Las Vegas. That was a couple of years ago. That was the very first beginning when I start really seeing people and the business community say, "Oh, that's gonna fly." And I also seen and talking quite a lot with Swisscom. Of course, we don't have to forget we also have national solutions going on, which, by the way, voice and AI are often one side of the other coin. Do you really believe that voice commerce is going to fly, and when?
That's a very great question. It's too early to say it directly, and I'm not that deep in the research and the technology to tell you exactly how and when it will happen. I think there's good evidence that voice is something that people adopt, that people are tending towards. I think up until today, voice just hasn't been good enough from a consumer perspective. It didn't make your life easier, because if you want to dictate somewhere something, a message on your smartphone, on your laptop, it just doesn't work that great, does it? So up until that is not solved, people don't understand, the consumers don't understand how they could actually use it. So I think there's one bit to be done to really make the experience, you have the communication with that bot that is working really well. And then people start realizing whether they want to adopt it. I think today, for me personally, it's a bit too early to say, will that fly? Will that be the next big thing? I think it's something we should have a closer look into because it shows the potential, but there's still some hurdles to be taken and to make it compatible for the masses. And then we'll see whether the masses accept it or not.
We've just our observatory, and maybe next time I will include, or also we will include after this video, some of our charts. Where our observatory had just run a study on Swiss people around food and the consumer behavior on food, and one indicator that was a bit surprising for me was about the interest around subscription model, which I really didn't understand in the beginning what it was meant about, and I dig into the data. And I figure out there are industries like, for example, fashion, where you like, I mean, one of the most example case studies in Switzerland, I guess, is Black Socks, about the possibility to receive every X month a certain amount of product. Do you see that an opportunity, like to have every 2 weeks my pizza coming up, my margarita pizza coming up at home, or is not really something?
Generally, yes. We thought about that kind of press, or we started the thinking process about implementing something like this, but we haven't really found a solution for it. And then the literal appetite of customers who were able or willing to sign up for something like this wasn't really there. So I think having a subscription model, yes. But then if I surprise you, so if you give me complete freedom and I just send you every Monday, I send you lunch or dinner, sometimes you just fancy something spicy, or you're just really up for a pizza. But then that day I send you something completely else and I disappoint you. I think those kind of cravings of the customer are very immediate. So people order when they are hungry and they fancy something. They don't just gonna give me food. No, they said, give me a kebab, give me a pizza, give me some salad. And I think this is where the difficulty lies in that one, because we're just aggregator. If it was about what I know, what works is in the fitness industry, if it is about complements, so protein products and whatever sort of products are used in that kind of industry, this is where it works. I think if Black Socks, which is the best example, because it's just Black Socks, right? If I get them now or in 4 weeks or in 8 weeks, as long as I have enough, I'm fine. But it doesn't really matter that much about the timing. I think for us, timing is more interesting and more decided to match the customer expectation.
Yeah. So, I mean, you are one of the, let's say, rising star or even rise star in the food tech space as a company. And when I think to Switzerland from a broad perspective, I realize we have in Zurich, for instance, a huge hub of technology like Google. If I understood correctly, they have over 5,000 people employed. Also, I guess, thanks to FoodTech. So we have quite a lot going on in technology in Switzerland, luckily enough. We have the Innovation Center of Microsoft. There is really, really, really a lot going on, I guess, especially in Zurich, thanks to FoodTech. On the other side, if I think more to Swiss Romand, of course, we have company like Nestlé in Vevey, we have P&G, and I've also heard that the Swiss Romand is working specifically to build up a food tech valley. And in Ticino here, we are more like concentrated on also food tech from a technology point of view, not really research and development, but really a business model like yours. Like, what do you think will happen next in the food tech space in Switzerland? Like, in general, what's happening in the food tech space for the next month? Also, I mean, due to the push of COVID, but especially in Switzerland, what do you see happening?
I think so what we have as an innovation in Switzerland is really great. And there's a lot of stuff happening generally in research and from the university and spin-offs from them. And that's super interesting to see. In the food tech space, often you need to think big if you want to start something like this. So if you're a marketplace like us, the Swiss market is great. But then if it goes to some other industries, you just need to think big, because often you need a fair scale of the business to make it happen. But I think generally becoming more smart in the kitchen is an interesting one. And smart is a huge word that applies, for example, for what kind of protein sources are we using on the one hand side? What about food waste? How can we prevent better food waste? So there's all sorts of, from a sourcing perspective, from a planning perspective, but then also in the aftermath, if you then really throw the food away, how this is then being detected and how this is being analyzed to give you a better indication of how to buy in the future. This is an interesting one, but then also how to, how to reuse some of the resources that you have and make this one better. I think that smartness is a lot of stuff. How to cook, how to source, how to prevent food waste. Kind of in that area is an interesting bit. And the protein, the alternative protein source discussion. This has taken off. This is now, you can find it in the grocery stores already. There's a couple of companies who are at scale, who are public now from the US. So this is an industry already, a big industry. Let's see how that's how that's established itself, if people are really using those kind of proteins in the long term or not. But things look good for them.
And also, I mean, we are in the world probably between the first and the second country for management of wealth of people. If I remember correctly, we are right now, thanks to the growth of UBS, number one. But of course, you are, let's say, in an area which is food tech that, I mean, it was booming. It's even more booming. How do you see, and if you ever have the chance to talk with investors, with bankers, the interest now in investing in technology and food tech? It's something that you perceive, or in Switzerland I'm talking about?
Not at a larger scale, but I think the overall that step change in digitalization that we just faced, I think that is just proving, it's another proof point to everyone who was discussing whether digitalization is a topic for my company or not. So I wouldn't limit it to the food tech industry. I think it was another proof point of, hey, there is the growth. Yes, there is the demand also. And then what does that mean for me as a company? Because in a crisis like this, it can be a differentiator whether you make it or you don't, through a crisis like this, whether you had e-commerce capabilities or you didn't. So I think it's just changed the perspective quite a bit. It used to be a constant, slow process. I think that crisis was a bit of a wake-up call, and I would have expect quite some investment from companies in that regard. And into food technology, how the appetite is from an investor point of view, I know too little about this, or have heard too little about this to make a proper quote here.
Yeah, let's hope. In my opinion, as acting as president of the National Association, I really hope that investors, bankers, family offices, holding company, they're starting looking more to technology. Of course, I mean, taking step-by-step decisions, but I think Switzerland in general, as a hub with what we have and the capital we have, could be really, really an interesting hub for investment in tech, I would say. And that's, of course, generates value for everybody, because companies are growing, paying taxes, and we need to relaunch our economy post COVID for sure.
Yeah.
So I'm asking if anyone has any other question, please to move forward. So that's kindly something to do if you want. I'm checking over. We did went through quite a lot of things. Maybe around the payment habits of people pre and post COVID, like what's going on in the payment scene, how people are used to digital payments.
So digital payments, as I mentioned earlier in the call, we always had cash payments. You could pay cash on our website, so the driver then would collect the money. But then non-cash payments, so we operate all sorts of credit cards, post-finance, Twint, PayPal, all the payment methods actually that you want, you can use. And that share has grown constantly. but seen a huge step change within the last couple of weeks. So we were, I think the online share grew by over 50% to what we had pre-crisis. So people were then using more and more the online channels. So this is, and again, this is something that won't go back, this won't go back to cash, I believe. There's a general, so Switzerland was always very attached to their cash for good reasons. But I think in the e-commerce, it's, even though we always had the opportunity, and again, for a good reason, but I think more and more cash will disappear in that regard.
Uh-huh. And I was thinking, I mean, it's always, especially talking with a lot of different businesses and industries, when we talk about digital and e-commerce, people are always talking about technology, and sometimes maybe they understand about people. But I also personally think that content, the quality of content, the number of content is one of the key drivers for the success of the digital and e-commerce business. How does it work in your platform and for restaurants, which I guess they're not photographer or expert in describing a pizza? How can you make a pizza look nicer or better or whatever?
Yeah. So generally content starts in written. So how do you describe the dish? Now a pizza margherita is pretty straightforward, but then mentioning that more than half of our orders are non-pizza, and then very quickly it becomes a little bit blurry. You know, how you describe the salad, the wrap, the Thai dish that you want to order. What exactly is inside? Do I like it? How spicy is it? And so forth. So the content of being how it is written is super important, and that's again the restaurant's duty of doing so, because they own the restaurant, they know what they put inside, so we can only display what they give us, right, as terms of ingredients. But if you write that in an appetizing way, number one, and also in a complete way, what is really in there, you're obviously doing yourself a favor, because customer expectation will be exactly where it should be. And the other point is around the food photography that you mentioned. We started more and more scaling to show pictures of the food. And yes, restaurants do it in very different manners. So we decided not the restaurants to let it do themselves, unless, the big branded restaurants, they have great dish photography, and this is then a part of their marketing and CI. So you want that dish to look exactly like that. So obviously we take those pictures. But then for the bigger part of the restaurant partners, we teamed up with companies that do photography, basically another platform that manages photographers. So then we could send them to the restaurant and then could do food pictures with a certain quality standard that we have. So, the food looks appetizing, differentiates it from your competition, and gives you a good indication of what you're actually going to order. So this is super important, but you can imagine doing this at a scale of 3,000 restaurants in Switzerland as of today. This is not happening overnight, right? And somebody also needs to pay those guys, pay the photographer, and restaurants don't always have the appetite to do so, or maybe don't even have the monetary leeway to do so. So this is a joint effort, really, because we know it's great for the consumer. Restaurant know it's great for its turnover. So we found joint efforts that we engage there with those kind of platforms and deliver as many photos as we can.
I don't know if you can share that, but what is the cost for producing content for a menu? Like if you buy it as an external service, like to have
for a restaurant?
Yeah.
It depends on how many of the dishes you want to be photographed. But if you want to have it in a professional manner, that's a couple of 100 francs. So it's somewhere between, depending, 200 to 400 francs, I would say.
For the full menu.
For the food, yeah, for the food pictures.
No,
if you do it
for the full menu.
For the full menu, yeah. Then you might, if you really do every single dish that you have on your menu, you might be somewhere between 400 and 500 Swiss francs. Shouldn't be much more, because a lot of the effort in those kind of business cases is the photographer needs to go there. He needs to build up his setup and the lighting and everything. And then how many dishes you then put in front of the lights, if it's 12 or 24, doesn't make that much of a difference. The main work is really setting up in the restaurant, putting all the stuff in your trunk and going back home, and then also operating the photographs, because obviously you need to crop them, you need to work on them. That's some more work on the laptop involved. But with the scale that we have, if you work with those kind of platforms, obviously they're interested in scale. And if you can say, look, we can guarantee you X restaurants that will participate, or we will pay for X restaurants that want to have food pictures, obviously then you have some economies of scale, and that's what we want.
When does it make sense to open a new town? So which is the amount of, or the elements that you need to consider to decide, okay, now we move to Lugano, Lucerne, whatever?
That discussion we didn't have for a long time, because we are pretty much everywhere. So we're way, way above 80% of the zip codes in Switzerland where we operate and have an offering. But back in the days when we were opening new cities, I think the break line was that we wanted 15 or 20 restaurants to have, so we could start, and then we could start with some sort of a marketing approach. So it starts working. That was kind of the base where we said, if you're under that one, the amount of customers who come and bounce and don't order is just too big. So the marketing spend and all the effort is not efficient enough. So if you were then above 15 or 20, that was usually enough for our industry. I guess that would depend pretty strongly per industry, whatever platform you are or whatever business you have. But that was the case for us.
Mm-hmm. And maybe ending up with the last question. By the way, thank you very much for your openness and deep, interesting insights you're sharing. A bit envisioning. So we'll be still using gig economy working in 5 years, or robot to deliver, or drone?
Another great question. So I think the whole drone delivery thing that has been in the press at times, etc. There's a couple of reasons why that will not happen in the short term with the drones, just because of the aerial space is heavily regulated, as it should be, by the way. So where does the drone really fly along? And that is step number one. So where does it start? First of all, in front of the restaurant, fine. But then also, where does it stop? In front of the customers. So if you live in an apartment building and you're in the 8th floor, where does the drone stop, right? Is it dropping off in front of, say it again?
At the window.
At the window, yeah, in best case. But how is that happening, right? Because then if the drone is really close to you, you could throw something at the drone and you could crash the drone just because you fancy crashing a drone. But that is not really great for the service itself. So, and if the drone landed in front of your house just at some hub somewhere, that again means you need to leave the house to go to the hub and pick up the food, which is not really the idea of home delivery. So for drones, I think they will take quite a bit of time up until that happens. Number two, for robots that drive in the streets, there were tests since a couple of years. But again, I don't seeing that scaling very quickly. But what I see and think is around gig economy. I'm personally not a great fan of the gig economy in the sense of hiring a driver just for the drop-off, and then maybe you have one drop-off in 1 hour or 5 drop-offs every night, but you don't make a living out of this one. So I think this is not correct from an ethical point of view as a platform, and to impose that kind of risk on the shoulders of a driver. So this is why today, and that's since a long time like this, all of the drivers that deliver food for us are employed. They're employed with third parties at this very moment. So we work with logistical experts that can provide this, because it's a whole different business than we do. We're good at e-commerce, we're good at online, we're good at those kind of things, acquiring restaurants. We don't have the experience of acquiring drivers at scale and maintaining a fleet at that scale, and also from a logistical point of view. So this is why we engaged with 3 companies in Switzerland that do basically the logistical service for us, and they're employed and they're insured as they should be. And so this is why I just say, as a definitory thing around gig economy, I'm not a huge fan of paying somebody just for 1 gig, which means dropping off of food. If it's for hire a freelancer for a week or a month, that's a whole different story, because I think it's a different type of employee or self-employed. A driver usually isn't that advanced in that regard. He doesn't have his own company, etc.
So I would say that we end up with it's not a question, but is something that I definitely agree with. And I don't know if Steven rings any bell to you. It's a friend, because Steven says, "Great interview, Dominic?" Question, full point. So I think that
Thank you, Steven.
is someone that you know.
I'm not sure. It could be.
But
It could be.
Anyway, I totally agree with that. So thank you very much. It was really very interesting. Thanks for your time. We will share the video afterwards over our community recorded. And again, all the best for the next month.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Ciao. Thank you, Dom.